All right, now let's bring in Professor Malte Brosig, International Relations Professor at the University of the Witwatersrand. He joins us now via Zoom, and I believe you are in Germany currently, Prof. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you very much. That's correct. Good afternoon.
Well, you know, images of the Russian troops showing tanks being pulled across the bridge linking Russia to Crimea and leaving the border with Ukraine and returning to the bases have been flighted by Russia. Somewhat of a good sign, one would think, but NATO, the US, as we've heard in the previous clip from President Biden, and the UK, all skeptical about the significance of this move. What does this mean, Prof? I mean, does this mean that there will be no invasion of the Ukraine by Russia? I mean, in that clip, President Biden saying that the troops still remain a threat?
Yeah, well, we always have to be very careful with these information, so we don't know exactly how many troops are where and how they are moving, for example. So this is all intelligence information that we cannot verify. But certainly, there's difference in the language and tone. And in the last couple of days, with more diplomacy, coming into the center of events. So maybe this is a first step in easing existing tensions, but it's certainly not over. And I guess for the next coming years or decades, Ukraine, NATO, that will be a dominating topic in the region.
Now, how much, let's say it is the case, that, the troops are indeed going back to their bases. How much of this decision by Russia is due to the efforts by the Biden administration? Or is it because of, Germany's involvement? We saw the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz engaging with President Vladimir Putin, not so long ago for several hours, and what was seen as a diplomatic push to avert this Russian invasion?
I think it's more the concerted effort, right? So we have seen President Macron traveling to Moscow, the German Chancellor, as well as we have seen at a lower level different diplomatic initiatives like the so-called Normandy format and the Minsk agreement. So these are diplomatic efforts that are already a couple of years old, but they haven't been effective in the last years or so. So we see in all fronts, we see diplomatic efforts, and it looks like that they are bearing some fruits, but we don't know. I mean, most of the issues are still unsolved, so I wouldn't bet that this is it at the moment. So again, I would assume that we have to live with these tensions for the time coming.
And now, of course, we know that, Scholz's visit with Putin comes after he first went to the Ukraine. Now, just how detrimental is a Russia without the support of Germany, given the trade relations these two countries enjoy?
Well, this is difficult to answer, I would say. It's not so easy. So there are a lot of mutual relations, and it's true that Germany is dependent on Russian gas supplies. So around 50 to 60% of German gas actually comes from Russia. So this will be difficult to replace immediately, right? On the other hand, also Russia is strong on the military side, but not so much on the economic side. So sanctions would hit the country pretty hard in the long run. So there's a mutual dependency here on both sides, and a war in the Ukraine would be damaging on both ends, actually, right? So if we apply a bit of reason, then a diplomatic solution is the best one here. So both countries, both sides can harm each other quite severely. But again, with a bit of reason, I think this certainly can be avoided.
Prof, maybe let's use this opportunity again just to reflect and give context. What is really at play behind this crisis with the West? We know, for instance, that Ukraine has a very strong desire to be a part of NATO, but some suggesting that would be detrimental to Putin's desire, in terms of his leadership strategy. Talk to us about what are we seeing now and why it is so.
Well, of course, there's a lot of history, and it would take a bit of time to bring everything together. But of course, as most people know, that Russia is not the Soviet Union right now, but many Eastern European countries have been forced into the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So it's not surprising that after the end of the Soviet times, these countries looked for other alternatives, and so far Western countries as well as Russia have not really settled on a multilateral agreement that actually integrates Russia into a post-Cold War, post-Cold War institutional structure here. But Russia, I think, also doesn't want to be integrated into anything that's Western, but it's seeing itself still as one of the leading powers of the continent. So we do have that clash of hegemonic power that's still happening. And I guess, certain like the Baltic countries, they were part of the Soviet Union. They have joined NATO, but it's not so realistic that Ukraine would actually join NATO. So this time it can apply for membership, but the chances of getting into the club are pretty limited here.
Now, I'd like to just revisit, what President Biden had said, just in his response about those troops that supposedly are leaving, the borders, saying that World War II, was a war of necessity, and in that particular war, Russia and the U.S. were on the same side. But he then quickly mentioned that Russia invading the Ukraine, well, that would be a war of choice. What do we make of those comments? I mean, they seem pretty loaded.
Well, if we simply look at the numbers and how fit the militaries are in Ukraine as well as in Russia, then you cannot really construct an argument that Ukraine is a threat to Russian sovereignty or integrity. So that is a pretty manufactured argument here. And however, you do have the impression that Russia isn't really interested in a sovereign Ukraine here, right? So it doesn't really give that country the right to take its own foreign policy in its own hands here, right? And that is also part of the problem. But of course, if Ukraine would join NATO, that would certainly be, I think, what can be called a legitimate Russian security concern here, because that would change geopolitics dramatically. But militarily, Russia is far, far more powerful than all of the eastern of its members and the western Russian border or Eastern Europe.
Prof Brosig, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate your analysis.
Thank you.
All right, Professor Malte Brosig, International Relations Professor at the University of Wits, coming to us live there from Germany, just speaking to us about Russia's supposed decision to remove troops at the border with Ukraine.